Our focus on standards has to become just as sharp for our industry so that we can benefit all of us as well as society. Because when standards work, these three things happen: innovation, growth, but most importantly, when the benefits accrue, they accrue to everyone. There's flexibility and there's support for every community because the standards are consistent everywhere, whether you're in the smallest town or the biggest city. So we have a lot of challenges. We've talked about them a lot that we face: supply, labor, complexity, and we're all going to be able to tackle them most effectively if we're together. And we think standards are key to making that happen. So I'm going to share a couple of examples that I think illustrate the importance of standards. And I'm going to start with what many people believe is the original, first in human history, high-tech driven network, the rail network. So if you went back to the 1840s in this country, you would have found over 300 independent railroad companies. Most of them had their own standard gauge for their company that was unique to their company, and they actually used it as a competitive barrier. So what was the impact? Well, if you wanted to ship something from New York to Baltimore, you might have to stop, have your freight unloaded, reload it onto someone else's train, go to the next stop, et cetera, et cetera. So some forward-looking government and industry leaders got together. They looked at the emerging rail industry. They even looked at the UK, and they adopted a standard. And I said, look, we have different rail companies, but we all agree for our industry, this is the rail gauge. The result, phenomenal. So if you look at this map, this is the Transcontinental Railroad, which was built only about a decade after that, big movement. It was actually built by 3 different companies, building at the same time. But it worked because they built it to a single standard. And the results of all of this were phenomenal. This was a foundational moment for the Industrial Revolution that's still impacting us today. And it could not be done without standards then, and that's why standards are still important today. And if you look at the rail industry and you'd say, well, that's kind of irrelevant, that's 150, 170 years ago, it's actually still something that's relevant today. Those of you who've been to San Francisco, you may have ridden on the Bay Area Rapid Transit System, the BART. When that system was developed, they actually chose a non-standard rail gauge. Fast forward a couple decades, what are they left with? Their trains cost twice as much as a standard train. And when there's a problem and they have to repair a train, their engineers actually have to go cannibalize old trains for parts, sometimes to get their trains back in service. 2x CapEx, higher OpEx, I think those are 2 things we can all understand. And so as you make decisions about the technology that you're adopting, as Michael said, you could be living with it for decades. It's really important for all of us to think about, are we headed down a cul-de-sac where we're going to be stuck with uncompetitive cost structures and operating structures because we chose something that was cool, maybe wasn't standard. So let's look at another example that's maybe a little bit closer to home. Let's look at ARPANET. 1969, government, some educational universities had a great idea to go create some networks that they could use to share content and information. Had a sleepy growth trajectory, go forward another decade. They've got some friends in the Midwest, a few on the East Coast, even a couple in Europe. Go another 10, 15 years, it's kind of the same trajectory. And then this gentleman, Tim Berners-Lee, came along. He had an innovation, HTML. Not perfect, but a really great technology, and it really changed the way people thought about sharing information between websites. So it's not what Tim did, it's what he didn't do that's really impressive. He didn't go to the Amazon or Google of the day, I know it's hard to remember, AOL. right? You've got mail. And he didn't go and say, oh my God, I've got this great technology. We could corner the market on it and we could get rich. He worked to establish an industry standard. And that industry standard is fundamental to what's happened over the next 3 decades. Billions and billions of websites, billions of connected users, our whole global economy transformed. And a core part of that transformation was a technology standard that everyone could build on. So you've heard a lot about the consumer giants, but also the Wi-Fi consumer direct companies who are all interested in our industry. The thing that I find most interesting about them is in their heart, in their DNA, they're a B2C company. And most B2C companies aren't that excited about standards. Why? Because it slows you down. You want to go fast. You want to get the latest and greatest thing in the stores. But the other interesting thing is, when you look at the strategies, these companies, they want to be the standard. They love walled gardens. They love you falling in love with the technology, standardizing it, and then you're in their walled garden, and they capture all the value. So most of you are probably aware that Jeff Bezos and his friend William Shatner went into space recently. I think that's what you can do when you have a $1 trillion plus market cap. I'm really happy for them. It's very cool. Way to go. I'll tell you what excites me, though. What excites me is when a service provider in Texas or Colorado or Tennessee deploys a technology in their community to their subscribers, and the lion's share of the profits go to them. And they reinvest it in their network, and they reinvest it in their community, and they grow their community, and they make it a great place for people to live. So while I'm really excited to see who Jeff goes into space with next, I don't know, maybe it's Sulu, I don't know what his plans are. Great. But when I look at our industry and I see the things that you are doing, that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to all embrace industry standards. So you've all heard, if you've been here for years, about industry standards as they apply to our Intelligent Access Edge portfolio. NetConf Yang, all the standards that we've adopted, and they're critically important. What's not as well known is the critical role that industry standards are playing in our evolving Revenue Edge portfolio. From the gateway, to the mesh units, to the clouds, to the solutions that ride on top of them. Industry standards are fundamental for us to enable this and enable you. And I wanted to share this with you. Even on a 90-foot screen, it's an eye chart. And the details don't really matter. What matters is what it represents. It represents 84 gateways that are made by our competitors that work with the Calix cloud. And that list grows every single quarter. And it represents our commitment to open standards, because we believe we're developing the best technology in our industry. But if you disagree with us, you shouldn't be stuck with us. And if you come back and say, you know what, I like the latest gateway from this company, but I've invested in Calix Cloud, okay. Hopefully we can keep talking, change your mind. That choice should be up to you. It shouldn't be up to a consumer giant. It shouldn't be up to us. And that is fundamental to our strategy and why we think industry standards are so critical. And so I'd like to invite our leader of Cloud Field Strategy to come talk to you about specifically where industry standards enable you through our Revenue Edge platform.